All right, good afternoon, everyone. Welcome to the sixth and final meeting of the DSL Division 89 Rulemaking Advisory Committee. Thanks for sticking with us throughout this process. We appreciate all of the input you've given, and hopefully in addressing your comments, we're making a stronger rule that works for everyone. So just a reminder for those who are interested parties, we do have some time towards the end of the meeting for you to speak. So please hold your questions and comments till then. For RAC members, you've done a great job of raising your virtual hands to help me call on you. So let's just continue in that regard this afternoon. So in just a moment, I will hand it over to Kirk, who is going to recap any of the outstanding issues that we talked about at meeting number 5 and follow up on those. And then we'll move away from the rules themselves and into the 3 documents that we sent to you, including the need for the rules, the fiscal impact statement, and the racial equity statement. Again, as I mentioned, we'll have some time for interested party comments, and then Danielle and I will summarize and let you know about what the next steps are before we adjourn. So, Kirk, why don't you take it away?
There we go. To get unmuted there. Let me just reiterate my thanks to all of you for hanging in this long. Looking at the calendar, I think it's almost 5 months to the day that we started this this process with you all. So, wow, you've been very patient with us. I'm very grateful for that. Thank you. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to go over the proposed changes that came out of last month's RAC meeting. You'll recall that last month's meeting was all about our final 2 general authorization types. One was waterway habitat restoration, and the second one was wetland ecosystem restoration. So as a result of your comments, we've made a few changes to the rules. There are also a couple open-ended questions that I wanted to come back to and see if you all had any further feedback. So I'm going to use the document there that Danielle has put up on the screen. Thank you, Danielle. Grab my pen. So we'll start with the waterway habitat improvement general authorization. So under, well, let me just get to that page so I have it in front of me. Under eligibility requirements for this GA, the wording that we, DSL, originally proposed said something to the effect of projects eligible for this authorization must be for the effect of waterway improvement, which means improving a waterway's naturalness or ecological integrity. One or more of you pointed out at the last meeting that, hey, those terms ecological integrity and naturalness are not defined terms like anywhere. And that if we're going to have eligibility standards or criteria, they kind of should be something definable. That's a good point. Someone else spoke up and said, well, what if we use the terms improvement in functions and values of the waterway? Well, we run into the same problem because we're not asking applicants here to do any sort of functional assessment to demonstrate any kind of function or value lift. So that really wouldn't be quantifiable either. So after mulling it over in my head, I will admit to you, I've sort of taken the easy way out, I think, on this one. And what I'm proposing to say is simply say that the eligibility standard here is that your proposed activity has to be one of the 9 outlined in section 0790, period. So I'm going to stop on that one and see what you all think. It's just sort of a very simplistic. You just have to be one of the 9 activities that's described below. Any concern with that?
Not seeing any.
Okay, I'm going to put an okay next to that, but if we need to come back to it, let me know. The next comment had to do with the activity called barrier removal. And it's specifically where someone is going to reconnect a side channel that's been where water's been cut off to that side channel. One of you, and I apologize, I didn't write down names here. One of you mentioned that it was unclear when we said that the removal cannot result in capture of main stem flow. And the question was, do you mean it can't entirely capture the flow of water? Can it capture any part of flow of the water? Well, it's going to have to capture some water flow in order to hydrate that reconnected side channel. So maybe as clarifying language, I stated that the reconnection cannot result in dewatering main stem flow. For the person that made that comment or anybody else, is that better? I want to avoid like percentages, like can't capture more than 50% of main stem flow, because I don't know how we would sort of do measure something like that.
Any thoughts on this one, or if you made the comment and you remember making the comment?
Yeah. Tommy, I'm
Chris.
wondering if it was you, but
We got Chris.
Yeah, go ahead, Chris.
Maybe Kirk, just clarify, when we say dewatering, I suspect in this context, we mean fully dewatering, not some percentage, but rather 100%.
Yeah,
correct?
Can't dry out the.
Right. Thank you.
Yeah, Kirk, this is Tommy with TU. I don't think I was the original comment, but I think I followed up on it. And, this text seems appropriate to me. So I'm okay with it personally.
Okay. Anyone else want to weigh in?
Sorry, I can't find my hand again.
There we go.
Sorry about that. So I just want to clarify, does that, what about changing perennial flow to intermittent flow? Or ephemeral? I just want to make sure we aren't.
Well, remember these are side channels. I would say if you're changing it to intermittent flow, then you've dewatered the channel for some part of the year, and no dewatering of the main stem.
Well, I think that kind of got in the previous, is dewatering completely or
Dewatering
period of the year, or
Yeah.
so that's something that could come up.
Okay, well, I can certainly play around with it a bit more, but really the message I'm trying to get is no drying out the main stem. The main stem needs to stay the main stem. It's just sort of the challenge of putting that in plain English. Anything else?
I think we're good, Kirk.
All right, I'm just making a quick note here before we move on. Okay, the next comment had to do with porous weirs. This one may have come from Brian Cook, as I recall. Consider allowing porous weirs to be channel spanning in some circumstances, similar to grade control structures where we do allow channel spanning. So the language has been modified as follows. Structure must not exceed 100 cubic yards and 40% of the channel cross-section width unless otherwise approved by the department. So in a case-by-case basis, we may allow channel spanning depending on your specific circumstances.
Questions or comments there? Seeing none.
Okie dokie. Okay, what's that one? Next one has to do with the activity that is removing, modifying, repairing, and replacing culverts and tide gates for fish passage purposes. The question came up, can we condition the DSL authorization to require either an ODF staff person or some other qualified person to be on site when culvert or tide gate work is being done? Well, we learned after the meeting, thank you, Nancy, she followed up on this, that in fact, ODFW has the authority to require such as part of their fish passage review. So my understanding is correct, Nancy. We don't need to address that here because if you guys feel it necessary, you can include that in your fish passage review. So no change is being proposed.
I think you can keep going.
Okay. Oops, what was that? Next one needs a little discussion. It has to do with beaver dam analogs and post-assisted log structures as waterway habitat activities. I'm pretty sure it was Lauren with the Farm Bureau brought up the concern that what recourse is there to downstream water users if one of these structures fails and damages downstream water user structures? And as I thought about that, you know, I guess that same question could be asked of really any project that involves putting something in the waterway. What happens if it fails and harms someone downstream? The only answer I had to that last time was that the damaged party would potentially have a tort claim, a damage claim against the project proponent. I wasn't aware of anything else on the books currently that would address that. I think Lauren had mentioned that she might be able to think about it or look into it a bit deeper. So I'm just wondering, I don't know if Lauren's out there, but from anyone, any further thoughts on that? Downstream users being harmed by a failure?
Any discussion on this topic? Kurt, do you want to repeat that question, please?
Sure. Repeat the question is, does anyone have further thoughts or a proposal regarding damage that could occur to downstream water users if a beaver dam analog or post-assisted log structure were to blow out and harm a downstream user? Is there any other protection, any other language we could offer here? I will say that a downstream water user, if they are harmed by some blown out structure upstream, they can always contact us and we can let them know what projects we authorized upstream of them. So the project proponent could be identified. So
I'm not seeing that the group has anything to contribute on this, Kirk.
Okay, all right, then we'll assume that a tort claim is probably their best course of action. All right, next issue also had to do with beaver dam analogs and post-assisted log structures. It was noted that almost all the other authorized activities have a cubic yard limitation within a certain distance. But for beaver dam analogs and post-assisted log structures, all we said is 100 cubic yards. We didn't say within what length of stream. So in almost every other case, we say 100 cubic yards per every 1/2 mile of waterway. So I'm proposing that we just make it consistent with all the other habitat structures, instead say per 1/2 mile of waterway. Any concern with that?
I think we've got a quiet bunch today, Kirk.
Okay, that's okay. If folks are happy, I am not going to complain. Next two actually have to do with engineered log jams. So the original wording for engineered log jams had several constraints in terms of the size of the wood pieces, the length of the wood pieces, etc. You all had raised concerns about that under the bank stabilization GA, when we talked about placing large wood there. You were concerned that kind of this stringent measurement requirements wouldn't necessarily apply to all streams, that different streams had different characteristics, different water regimes that could constitute different sizing of large wood. I think that same logic applies here to engineered log jams. So DSL is proposing to take out the hard and fast length and width requirements and use the same language that we agreed to for stream bank stabilization. And that is, at a minimum, wood pieces, I'm sorry, it's not the same language as stream bank stabilization. So this is new proposed language. At a minimum, wood pieces or their cumulative effect must be of a size sufficient to withstand bank full rates of flow. That is, it's got to be sturdy enough to withstand or stand up to flow that occurs at a bank full rate. Do note that bank full is a defined term in the removal fill law, and it means the 2-year flood occurrence interval. Is bank full flow rate enough? Do we want to make it bigger? Should it withstand a higher rate of flow? Other common rates of flow that are cited are typically 10 and 25-year rates of flow.
Chris, please go ahead.
Right. Well, I mean, I think in practice, that 25-year event is probably where we really are. I don't think we like under designing these things.
Mhm.
So I would be comfortable if you chose and the group supported a 25-year design, design for a 25-year event.
Yeah.
And size, of course.
Yes, right. And I think that proposal would probably appeal to those that do have concern about blowouts damaging downstream water users as well. So we have a proposal to increase that to withstand a 25-year rate of flow.
We see some thumbs up, or I mean, we'll take your silence as support. But thoughts on the proposal from Chris? Got a thumbs up and a lot of silence. So
Okay.
it sounds like people are in support. Thank
Okay,
you.
so for the purposes of the public review draft, we'll show a 25-year rate of flow. The other proposed change regarding engineered log jams is the same change that we made under stream bank stabilization. That is, wood species must be of a species native to the riparian zone within the project area or a reference area, unless otherwise approved by the department. The original language was intact conifer, period.
Assuming since we approved that language earlier, most are in support.
Yeah, not surprising. Okay.
Yeah.
All right, the last two changes are on the wetland ecosystem improvement general authorization, so activities that improve wetlands. You all just had two comments, pretty straightforward. ODFW asked if one of the eligibility requirements could be consistency with habitat incentive agreements. So if the project is under a habitat incentive agreement with ODFW, the activities must be in conformance with that agreement, which I think makes sense. But if anyone disagrees, let me know. I do have a question for Nancy. Should that same language be in the waterway habitat improvement GA also? Should that be our eligibility criterion for the waterway GA?
Kirk, Nancy has a comment. It says, yes, please.
Yes, please. Okay.
Chris, why don't you go ahead?
Well, I just have a clarification question, I think on this one. Is there some concern that when ODFW issues these habitat incentive agreements that they're somehow maybe not followed, or they're having a hard time at the department maybe enforcing those? Or I guess part of me isn't sure that this needs to be in the general authorization at all. I guess I'm looking for some supporting information as to why this would be important to include.
Okay. So it sounds like that's at least in part a question to Nancy.
Yeah, I think that's right,
Okay.
Kurt. Sorry, Nancy. Maybe if I could go a little further, are we?
Nancy's
Okay.
comment is that these agreements are long-term and there is not consistent oversight through time.
Okay, so maybe a follow-up if I could. Nancy, then is the strategy or tactic here to say if we include them, we get, in a sense, another layer of review and kind of compliance? Is that sort of the hope or the goal here?
Yes, and to ensure that the activity conducted by the GA does not undo the benefits previously achieved.
So for me, it feels like I kind of read this as sort of a reminder to an applicant that if you have a habitat incentive agreement with ODFW, just make sure that the GA work that you're applying for is consistent with that agreement. So I think it's more a reminder. I don't see it as a new layer of regulatory oversight.
Okay, yeah, I could surely accept that. I don't think I have a big heartburn over it.
Okay.
Thank you.
Okay.
Anyone else have thoughts or comments on that topic? All right, Kirk.
All right, last one. Someone made the great point that exclusion fencing in wetlands to protect new vegetative plantings, woody plantings, should be identified as temporary. We don't want the fencing to stay out there forever. So we changed it to placement of temporary exclusion fencing as the authorized activity. And temporary by Division 85 administrative rule is typically 2 years, 24 months.
All right, last one. Any thoughts? Any comments? Questions for Kirk? All right.
Well, I feel like balloons should be showering down right about.
The text effect where all the confetti comes down.
Right.
I think we should, Kirk, before we move on to those other documents, just see if there's any outstanding questions or
Yeah.
comments that people have about the rule in general. We've gone through all the specifics and the line by lines, but just want to see if anyone has any impressions or thoughts they want to share, or maybe other items DSL might want to consider in the long term. Maybe not for this rulemaking process, but in the long term.
Yeah, good question.
Chris.
Gee, sorry, guys. I do have one quick question regarding next steps. Will we get a chance as RAC members to review the entirety of what we've proposed here? Maybe sort of as a last step, and I wouldn't advise a lot of time to do that. It would need to be fairly quick if that allowance is even made. But sometimes you can benefit by reading some of the changes in the broader context. So I just wonder if that opportunity exists.
So I'll start, Danielle, but please follow up. So so one of our next steps, Chris, is to basically polish up the rule with all the proposed changes we've made now. And pretty soon we're going to go out and make a public draft available for a public comment period. So unless I'm speaking falsely, Danielle, we can certainly provide a copy of that public review draft to the RAC so that they can have their own look. And if they want to comment during the public review period, they can certainly do that. Is that a fair
Yes.
statement?
Yes, all the RAC members will receive notice of when our public comment period begins and where they can find the proposed rule language.
Thank you.
Any other questions or thoughts about the rule that you want to share before we wrap things up and move on to the three documents I mentioned earlier? All right, seeing none, Kirk, let's move on.
Okay. So we are required by law to prepare 4 supporting documents with any.
Kirk, I just want to say that Brian did just show some confetti emoji to celebrate, so I didn't want that to slide by without you noticing.
Good stuff.
Sorry.
I sort of felt it from you.
Continue.
So by law, there are something like 4 supporting documents that we need to submit as part of our rulemaking effort. And we are obligated and certainly want to get the RAC's input on those documents before we submit them. Those 4 documents are need for the rules, which is only intended to be a short statement, fiscal and economic impact of the proposed rules, cost of compliance, particularly to small business. And finally, we have to prepare a racial equity statement. So those items were sent to you a couple weeks ago. I'm going to just hit some highlights with you real quick, starting with need for the rules. We actually went over this at meeting number 1. So here it is now in just a paragraph form. So the need is 4-fold. We wanted to update general and activity-specific conditions of the GA to ensure protection of functions and values of wetlands and waterways. We wanted to include some additional qualifying activities that have no more than minimal adverse effect. We've sure done that. We wanted to remove 2 general authorizations that are either no longer being used or duplicative of other regulatory tools. So just as a reminder, those 2 that we've removed are removal of sediment behind tide gates within hydraulically closed perimeters. And we removed the transportation related activities GA. Then the final need is to generally improve consistency, readability, and organization. Hopefully, we've accomplished at least a little bit of that. Anyone have any concerns with that?
Go ahead, Chris.
I confess my mom was an English major, but under number 3, you're missing an ER behind long.
Oh. I'm sorry, where at, Chris?
You had it. No,
No
Danielle already added it.
longer. Okay, thank you. She's got it. Cool. Thank you. I sure did miss that.
Anyone else have any comments, grammatical or otherwise, on the statement here? All right, moving right along.
All right, let's take a look at, I assume we're going to go to fiscal and economic impact, Danielle. Yep, there it is. Okay, let me hit some highlights for you here. So, proposed change, keep in mind with this document, we're not talking about the entire rule. We're talking about the proposed changes to the rule. So, proposed changes to the rule are expected to have an overall positive fiscal and economic impact to the regulated community. Why is that? Because some activities previously requiring the more time-consuming general permits and individual permits may now qualify for the streamlined general authorization process. So for some activities, we're now shunting people away from the expensive hard process to the easy, quick 30-day process. In other cases, the amount of removal or fill that can be performed under a general authorization has been raised. And I give some examples there. Thus, diverting these projects away from general permits and individual permits and pushing them into the simpler, cheaper general authorization process. We did want to note, however, that there are several areas where the regulated public might experience a negative fiscal or economic impact. We identified 3. First would be the proposed rules would disallow the use of any general authorization within the Portland Harbor Superfund site. So reminder, that's Willamette River, river miles 1.9 to 11.8. So that would have the effect of anybody that wants to do a project there is going to get pushed out of the easy, quick pass process and into one of our more rigorous processes. I guess the good news on that is we only authorize on average, it was like 4 general authorizations per year in that area. And they were pretty much all related to Superfund cleanup. The second area is residential dock projects. Remember that if you want to qualify for the streamlined process, your dock material has to be metal graded. It cannot be wood anymore. And it's going to be limited to 144 square feet. Anything else is going to have to go through a more rigorous permit process. So that will entail some costs in some cases to residential dock owners. And then the third area was that the proposed rules will require, in most cases, that folks get their fish passage review completed before they apply to DSL. So I will note that that's not a new requirement. Folks are always required to get a fish passage review, but to hardwire it into our rules means that it may now catch people that would otherwise have slipped through otherwise. So whether or not you call that a fiscal or economic impact, I don't know, but I just wanted to be as inclusive as possible. I'm going to stop there for a moment and just ask, from your all's perspective, am I missing any new costs that you think we've introduced to the public by this that I've missed here?
Not seeing any, Kirk.
Okay. I'll continue then. So we are proposing to get rid of 2 GAs entirely, and I've noted here that the department does not think that that will create a fiscal or economic impact, since those activities have other low or no cost regulatory compliance options available to them. Many of the activities that those GAs covered are actually now exempt under removal fill law. And the remaining activities, there are other permitting tools available to them to get authorization. Let's see. So then finally, this document talks about what's the effect to the Department of State Lands. So for the department, we think it'll have an overall positive fiscal, not economic, but fiscal impact, since more applications are likely to get diverted from the individual permit process, which consumes a lot of staff time, and get pushed into the general authorization process, which is much easier, much more time efficient for our staff. So that is it, what the department came up with, fiscal and economic impact. Is there anything anybody else would want to see added to that?
I think we're okay to keep going, Kirk.
Okay. Then the next related document is cost of compliance, and we're required to respond to 2 questions here. The first one is, it asks us to identify any state or local government agencies or members of the public likely to be economically affected by the rules. Well, so this is an existing rule, which certain changes are proposed. Any state agency, unit of local government, member of the public that seeks to conduct removal fill might be affected by these rules, especially if they can qualify for a GA. For state agencies, the most common users of GAs are ODOT, ODFW, and more occasionally Water Resources Department, DEQ, the State University System, and Oregon's ports. For units of local government, most common users are public works, municipal utility, road departments, and parks departments. And for members of the public, it's most often by people who own property adjacent to a waterway or have a waterway within their property boundaries. Pretty straightforward. The more important question, I think, is what effect will the change in rules have on small business? So it asks that we estimate the number and type of small businesses subject to the rule. Now, this is a tough one. So what we say is the types of small business potentially subject falls into 2 categories. So one type of small business will be professional services contracted by applicants. And I give some examples of professional service types. Because professional services are typically third parties hired by applicants, it is not possible for the department to estimate the number of such businesses that might be involved. And then related to that, any small business itself seeking to conduct removal or fill activity in waters of the state, there might be an economic effect to them. However, the department does not collect data on how many applicants fall into the category of small business, so we can't really give a real numerical answer to that question. I'll pause there for a moment, let folks catch up and see if there are any questions so far.
Not seeing any.
Okay. The next question it asks us is to describe expected reporting, record keeping, and administrative activities and the cost required to comply with the rule. So again, we're only looking at the rule changes. Have we introduced any new administrative or record keeping costs? Well, yes, we have. Most applications for GAs will now require evidence of completed fish passage review by ODFW. Again, it's always been required, but it will require, it may introduce some additional record keeping for applicants that are small businesses to ensure that they do complete that fish passage review and the review results do get submitted to us. So there is some effect there. The rectification and monitoring reports that we required for the temporary impact GA. That's the report where you have to tell us or show us that you restored the wetland that you temporarily impacted. We did add a couple new elements to that report. We are now requiring that you report on any deviations from the approved work. And there's a new cover sheet that has to be included in that report that you submit to us. I've estimated that cost at roughly a few hours of additional time at $100 an hour. A few $100s would be the potential impact. And finally, it asks to estimate the cost of professional services, equipment, supplies, and labor, and increased admin to comply with the rules. So a few things. Proposed changes are expected to have little or no change in the cost of equipment, supplies, or labor for small business. One possible exception would be for proposed residential docks, where we're now requiring use of steel grating. This might have some positive effect on any small business that manufactures that sort of material. Maybe. Next one is some small business types may experience a reduced use or cost of professional services. If we can push them or move their activity into a general authorization, I'm going to expect that your need for professional services to assist you in filling out that application will be significantly less, since it's a much simpler application form to qualify for a GA. So there may be some cost savings there. It is not expected that small business will be affected by not allowing general authorizations in Portland Harbor, since small business is never an applicant for authorizations within Portland Harbor. It's always DEQ or major corporations. The effect of small business, such as farmers and other beneficiaries of drainage behind tide gates from the proposed rule deletion, is expected to be minimal, since this GA has only been used 4 times in the last 10 years, and other low or no cost options for permitting such activities already exist. And then finally, no effect to small business is expected for deleting transportation-related activities general authorization, since ODOT and city and county road departments are only applicants for those. Questions, concerns?
I don't think so, Kirk.
Okay, last document. This was a new one for me. Racial equity statement. So it just begins, that first paragraph is just a little preamble. The requirement here is really fourfold. There are 4 questions. First is, what persons and groups are subject to the rule? Well, we kind of answered that in the previous documents, so I just kind of regurgitated that answer here to outline the kinds of people that are subject to general authorizations. What issues are the rules seeking to address? Well, that's really the need for the rulemaking. So I borrowed that need language and basically plugged it in here, so nothing new. Third, which racial groups are likely to be affected by those issues? So the department does not collect data on the racial makeup of general authorization applicants. What we do know is the number of general authorization applications that come from the tribes. That's the closest thing we get to any sort of racial monitoring of our applicants. So while the tribes are infrequent users of GAs, it is conceivable that the proposed rule changes may increase the use of this expedited tool by the tribes. I sure hope it does. Racial groups not regulated by these rules may still experience some benefit from the additional environmental protections afforded by the proposed rule changes, and they may benefit from more rapid approval of certain public benefit projects that involve removal fill activity. It is expected that these benefits would be accrued proportionately to the racial makeup of a given community or area. The point being, if we can approve public benefit projects faster, everyone benefits, including whatever racial makeup that community may have. And finally, ultimately, what impacts might this rule have on racial equity? Considering the information above, the department concludes there's unlikely to be an impact to racial equity in Oregon. Does anybody disagree with that last statement?
I think you've done a good job, Kirk. I'm not seeing any questions or comments.
All right, fantastic. You folks are awesome. Can't thank you enough.
All right, well, let's go to Danielle to kind of reiterate and expand on kind of the next steps so everyone knows what's coming up. Oh, I'm sorry. First, we want to do interested parties. Do any of our interested parties have any questions or comments about any of the materials that we walked through today? I am not seeing any hands go up. So now we will go over to Danielle to talk about what is coming up next on the road to these rules being rule changes being adopted.
Thank you, Steve. So up next is we are going to have DOJ, the Department of Justice, review these rules to make sure we are complying with statute and we aren't exceeding any authorities there. And then once we have a completed internal review and DOJ review, we're going to file our notice of proposed rulemaking. So the 3 documents that we went over today are core pieces to the notice of proposed rulemaking. So thank y'all for reviewing that. And that will either be published at the beginning of January or the beginning of February, depending on how long this next review process takes from DOJ and comments that need to be incorporated and reviewed. So we're looking at early 2024 for a public comment period. And as I said earlier, members of the RAC are already on the listserv to receive notice of that public comment period. And it will be a 30-day public comment period. So if we start in January, we'll go through February 1st. And if we start in February, we'll go through the first couple of days of March for this public review period. We'll have a public rule hearing, which will occur either January 16th or February 15th. We can't have it earlier than the 15th of the month for public, according to public meeting law. So again, that information will come to the RAC with the notice of the public comment period, as well as like the Zoom information of how to join, what time we're having it, and whatnot. And during that public hearing, we'll have an informational presentation with a Q&A session, followed by the hearing where we will hear any oral comments that members of the public have. And then once the public comment period is over, depending on any comments that we receive, we'll do another review of the rules, and then those will, once we have finalized our rule language, will be routed internally through management for final approval by the executive director. So I'm just thinking about our timeline. I think we're looking at the earliest we will have effective rules will probably be early April. And we'll send notice of that adoption, and the RAC will also receive notice of the adoption of those rules. So I don't know if anybody has any questions about upcoming process for rulemaking. I'm happy to answer those.
I think the takeaway is they're all on the list for notifications.
Yes.
So we encourage folks to stay involved and as Chris mentioned, kind of take your opportunity to review it all in one place when that becomes available. And if you have any final comments, please share them.
Yes.
Okay. Well, I think that about does it for us, not just for today, but for this whole process. I'll let Kirk say the final goodbyes, but one more thank you to each and every one of you. This has been a pretty darn smooth process, and you all worked well together in terms of building on each other's comments and really strengthening what we're proposing here. So appreciate your cooperation and your contributions throughout the process.
And not only does this conclude the RAC process, we're very close to concluding Kirk's time at DSL. So for all of you that I've had the pleasure of working with in the past, I'm really going to miss the work. It's been a blast. It's been great. I recognize I think I've worked with almost every name on this RAC. So you continue to do great work out there, folks, and just thank you so much for your willingness to support the agency with this effort. Thank you.
And I'm gonna say thank you, Kirk. As always, great working with you.
Thank you.
Yeah.
Thank
Good
you,
luck in the
Kirk. Thank
future.
you, everyone.
Thanks, Kurt. Thanks, Steve.
All right.
Take care.